So there are a couple of different approaches that can be used to resolve conflict, but really they're boiling down to two things. One is sort of a classic compromise route, and the other is more an enforced route where you're going down that kind of mediation, arbitration type route. But ultimately, what you really want to try and do is get that compromise route working. And as part of that, one of the things is really to start off by suspending that self protection and self preservation instinct that we all have. And that's really to enable you to have a good discussion from that compromise point of view. And at the same time, you also need to engage to learn about the different viewpoints. And again, this comes back to what we've mentioned previously in this series about learning about other people's viewpoints and sitting in their seat or standing in their shoes, and to try and figure out what would be an agreeable solution from their point of view. So in this kind of small chart, you can see that there's a kind of compromise at the heart of it, and that people generally will be either more concerned with results or more concerned about the people. And that really boils everything down to those kind of four key areas. So you have someone who is very concerned for people, but doesn't really care about the results, will obviously be very accommodating because they'll be making sure that the people are not working too hard, or they can leave early, or do whatever they need to do. Conversely, someone who's very much about results but really doesn't care about the people is going to be aggressive and will be perceived as being aggressive. If you're someone who doesn't care about people or results, they'll just have the head down and be avoiding everybody. And then at the top right, if you have a concern both for people and for results, that's really where you're looking at collaboration. And a collaborative exercise like that, or collaborative endeavor, really is one of the most useful ways to go. And that's where you can kind of bring the compromise in. Okay? So if we kind of just talk a little bit about what those different things mean. And that's what these boxes over to the left of the little chart are. So forcing is really that aggression idea. And that's, in the management kind of textbooks, often that is referred to as someone who's a shark. And that's basically, just get it done. Okay? So it might be, you might have to compromise to a certain extent, but you're kind of perceiving that you're winning more than you're compromising. Okay? So you're really just driving it and pushing that particular viewpoint and agenda. From the accommodation side of things, which is the flip side, again, remember this is very much about the people, the kind of analogy that's thrown around, that's the kind of teddy bear. And that might be someone who might just agree with the kind of feelings of the group, even though that's not really what they want. They're just kind of, they're more concerned about what other people might think of them, or the viewpoint of people. And they also have a concern for people. The collaboration idea is this idea of someone who really wants to make sure that they can have the best of everything. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. And often that can be time limited. It's absolutely possible to have those collaboration and that collaborative exercise, but there may not be enough time to actually achieve it. So there is a kind of, a trade-off here, that if you are collaborating like that and you don't have enough time to do it, then, or do it properly, I should say, then maybe you just have to go with what you can get. And that's where the compromise comes in later on. Avoidance basically is turtle hiding in your shell. You don't get involved really in anything. And from a manager's point of view, you have to make sure that that person feels safe, so that they're not lost in any way, that they're not really at risk, that they can get involved in this negotiation without sort of a huge threat to themselves. And then the last one really is compromising. And that's kind of, I suppose, the key part in the center. It's making sure you have enough concern for the results and enough concern for people that you can get the job done. It's not being Machiavellian and just doing it at all costs. It's making sure that you remember that the people who are doing the work are people at the end of the day. And then you compromise. You get it done quickly. It's almost like collaboration light, because collaboration is the ideal situation, but compromise is something that you have the time, the space to do, and you can kind of get stuck in and get a solution that works and works well enough to actually keep going with. And it may be that you compromise right now with a view to doing that collaboration in a more detailed and deep way later on. So that's one part. Now, the other thing is if you move beyond negotiation, then you're getting into the kind of higher level stuff. And by higher level, I mean more structured, more formalized, more likely to involve a well-paid barrister. And really, if you look at the left column of this little table, it has negotiation, and in a negotiation, it's really the people who are negotiating that make the decision. In a negotiation, the people who are negotiating control how fast the discussions happen and so on. Nobody else is involved. Everybody gets involved in it. So if you're two people negotiating or two teams negotiating, it's those teams that are doing it. They don't have to be dictated to by anyone else. And the outcomes of that negotiation are whatever is negotiated. So it's completely controlled and it's within your power. Okay, and that's really that kind of idea of the compromise, so negotiated compromise. But when we ratchet it up, and I mentioned the idea of having this escalation of assertiveness, and it's the same kind of idea. It's almost the escalation of conflict resolution. And you see this all the time in industrial relations. So the next step up is mediation. So in mediation, the people who are engaged in negotiation or have the conflict with one another, they're still the key players. But the mediator is running the show. So they've lost a certain amount of power. Okay? The third party that's involved here is the independent mediator. They're impartial. They don't really care for one side or the other. They just want to make sure that an outcome comes out of it that's as mutually beneficial for the two parties involved as possible. But everybody is involved in this, okay? So the mediator is basically just making sure that everyone talks together in a sensible way and brings sensible things to the table. Now, the next step up from that is another step where the negotiating parties or the parties in conflict are losing power. So they're handing it away to someone else. And that obviously becomes more and more sort of disenfranchising and arguably you could say more dangerous for the people involved in it because they are losing the power. Now with arbitration, it's a much more formal process, and in arbitration you have an independent person, but in this case, and in contrast to mediation where you have a facilitator, in arbitration you have someone who's expert in the area. So if it was a lab issue, you might have arbitration from someone who had expertise in the laboratory in another setting. But ultimately, you're arbitrating on what each side bring to the table. So each of the two sides in conflict brings their proposal or whatever it is. They give all of the ideas, the background, the context and everything, and then the arbitrator weighs all of that up independently, okay, and will end up with that kind of compromise, hopefully. It's based on clear evidence, clear facts, with technical viewpoint that's aware of the context and the subtleties and the nuances. So it's not just someone who doesn't know the area. It has to be someone who knows the area. And then the last step, and this is when the power sort of fades away maximally, is when you have litigation where a judge is involved. It's totally controlled by the judge and it's very, very formal, and you need advocates in there, and really what you're trying to do is highlight your case, destroy somebody else's. This is just all classic TV courtroom drama stuff. And really you're not involved in it. It's someone who actually is a representative of your viewpoint. And ultimately it just comes down to a win-lose situation. Okay? There's no sort of compromise or negotiation here. It's based on the precedents and the technicalities of the arguments, and that's it. Now, as you can see, it's better to be on the left-hand side of that table, at the negotiation side, because this is where the control lies. The more you go to the right, the less control the participants have in the overall process, and the more dangerous it becomes for them. So whenever possible, aim for negotiated compromise. Be able to suspend your patterns of protection, so what you normally do to protect yourself and your viewpoint, and try and understand what somebody else's viewpoint is. And that's a starting point in how you might actually be able to resolve that particular conflict.